Go Vandals.
Oh my gosh.
Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs of the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined as always by producer, blanked out because we don't say that word anymore, Martin, down in Moscow. Martin, how you doing?
It's going good. It's another week, another show. Sad the regular season in basketball has ended, but hey, it means only one thing's coming up, and I know we're going to be talking about it, at least from the men's side, on this show tonight.
There we go. And sad is a relative word, Martin. But speaking of sadness, Bryan Marceau, our basketball expert. Bryan, tell us how you're doing in the wake of what we're about to be talking about.
Well, hey, expert, your word, not mine. But dude, when Dallas was gone at the Nickelback show last week, I talked kind of excited about how Idaho had looked, last eight-ish games. And I made a reference to NAU and Montana State being in a contest to see who is most likely to trip on their dick on the way out the season. We know who the appendage tripping champion is right now, man. It's Idaho. It's pretty rough, but we still have basketball, man. We're not that far from the desert of sports that is after spring football. So even if it's fresh golden veggies, like the ticker tells you right now, for viewers, while it's here, you got to watch.
Yeah, let's get into it, guys. It is veggie time. This is Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expeditions. Yeah, Bryan, again, sports are still happening. Vandal sports are still going on, so that's positive. But, man, not a whole lot of positive takeaways to talk about here. We're just going to rip through it. I'm going to go through some box scores real fast. Starting off this 3-game stretch of games we're going to talk about back on the 29th of February. Montana State 62, Idaho 48. Idaho led by Quinn Denker, EJ Neal, and Taryn Frank, each with 8 points apiece. No Vandal got into double digits. Unfortunately, 17 turnovers to 6 assists doomed the Vandals in that one. They followed that up a couple nights later with And I should point out, D'Angelo Minnis back in the lineup. Did not start, but played 12 minutes, didn't get a ton of time. Then a couple nights later, Montana versus Idaho for senior night. Minnis is back in the starting rotation here, but oh boy, Idaho loses 80-57. Quinn Danker and EJ Neal 13 and 15 points respectively, but Idaho gets absolutely manhandled on the boards, getting out rebounded 38-24 on the way to that 23-point loss. And then that leads us to last night, 72-57, lost to Portland State. D'Angelo Minnis led the Vandals with 16 points, but Bryan, that was just it got out of hand very quick. Portland cracked open a 20-point lead in the first half, and it was just really never that close. So 3 straight games, Bryan, pretty large double-digit losses that just really, it never felt really close from the get-go for really any of these games. Where do you want to take this, Bryan? This is a pretty rough end to the season. As the regular season has now concluded, Idaho locked into the number 9 spot in Boise. We'll talk about that in the halfway point of the show, but let's recap these games, Bryan. Where do you want to start?
Dude, the bottom just fell out. And that's it. Like, hey, you can talk X's and O's, you can talk advantages, disadvantages, but I got to tell you, the thing that viscerally stands out, Idaho's last 3 games, they don't look like they're ready to compete. Not at all. I mean, outside of EJ Neal stands out as kind of the lone guy who looks like he's bringing fire. The good news is Tyler Lindhart is back. We'll hit his production too, because that could matter. And I bring him up because, hey, if you're coming back from injury, it makes sense that, it'll take a few games to completely hit your stride. But honestly, Idaho looks like they thought after beating NAU that they'd won the Big Sky title. And even in that NAU game, Dallas, look, Idaho was down 15 in the first half. Before the NAU game last week, I talked about Northern Colorado as the template of, hey, switch all pick and rolls. Just make sure Julius Mims doesn't get behind the defense, so he doesn't get easy shots, easy looks at the hoop. Ditto Kyson Rose, and make Vandal guards beat you. And the last 3 games, Idaho's averaging 54 points per game. Hey, Dallas, if you're curious where that would rank nationally, last 360, that would be number 351 in the nation. There's 351 Division I teams right now. Worst scoring team in the nation, Mississippi Valley State, averaging 54.7. Idaho found a way to do worse than that the last 3 games of the season. So offensively, what's happening is those easy points that, hey, every team that scores a lot gets easy points. That's not a pejorative. If you're just a casual basketball fan, that means good looks that are not contested. Teams that score a lot of points like Eastern, they get easy points. That's how it works. Idaho's not getting that 25, 27-ish points out of the 4-5 slot, which is for the most part been Julius Mims and Kyson Rose. The last 3 games, they're not even getting 10 out of the 4 or 5 spot, starting spot combined. And without those easy points, Idaho's guards are simply not good enough. That's it, man. I don't mean this to put anyone down on the team. I think Idaho's got the worst guards in the Big Sky. As far as like being athletic, as far as no real shot creators. And the other jury that's in, post Weber State, and man, you saw this against Portland State. If you're struggling with Idaho at all, throw out a press. The team doesn't have enough ball handlers. And Idaho really struggled with the Portland State press on Monday. One of the things that was incredibly frustrating to watch is, look, if you know basketball, hey, full court zone press, where do you want the inbound pass to go? You want it to go to the corner right away, with a defender to come down to immediately pick off the pass right back to the middle of the court to the inbounder. Idaho kept going to the corner right away on inbounding pass, play after play after play, because Idaho guards couldn't get open anywhere except where Portland State wanted them to. So, hey, I just did kind of a data dump, but look, Jaden Barfus in the comment section says the defense have been rough the last few games. To me, what you're describing is guys looking like they're not competing. But the additional part to tag on to that is basketball is a game of runs. Teams are going to make shots. That's how, if you're a good team, you weather the storm, you push back and go on your own runs. Well, Idaho's scoring 54 points a game last 3 games. They're not going on any runs. 54 points a game is good enough to beat nothing. 54 points a game is not really even good for a high school team if they're playing a 32-minute basketball game. So in short, I mean, like a first takeaway, talking broadly, the team's not competing. They're wearing down. The posts are getting frustrated because they're not only getting none of the easy looks they used to get, but also like they're just also they're not getting as many looks. Part of that's because defenses aren't scared at all. Idaho's wings put no pressure on defense whatsoever right now, which means teams can essentially switch everything without any concern for mismatches on the wing. And then Julius Mims, Kyson Rose aren't getting those looks, and suddenly you have guys getting frustrated, and that's how you get 54 points per game, and that frustration bleeds over into defense. And just like football, in defensively, if the offense can't provide a little bit of reprieve, you're gonna stall out. Well, hey, ditto. Idaho's been a defensive-oriented basketball team. We knew that heading into the season, but they haven't looked good defensively because they're stalling out. And again, I can't answer this. Alex Pribble is the one who's got to answer this one. How this team, the last 5 games, they dig a hole right away. They just do not look ready to play, especially the last 3. And now we're heading to the Big Sky Conference tournament. Idaho has not won a Big Sky Conference tournament game in 6 years. If Idaho loses again, that's 7. This is a big deal for Idaho to turn it around. And I don't know. I don't know what to say other than at least they have a week off.
Yeah, I mean, a week off to get guys a little bit healthier. Again, Minnis obviously coming back, Linhart coming back. Like, hopefully there's enough there that you can spark a win over the number 10 team. Idaho slotted in as the number 9 team playing in that very first round. Hopefully you can spark something there, but realistically, Bryan, I mean, you hit it on the head. This is a team that just doesn't have the guard and wing play to succeed on a consistent basis. Obviously, there have been some high points. There have been points where we thought, hey, but maybe Idaho's turning the corner. Maybe things are developing. But at the end of the day, when your posts are getting limited because no one's afraid of the guys on the wing, you're just going to get kind of stuck here. It's not that Idaho's awful at shooting the deep ball, but
they're not great.
They're not great. There's not anybody on this team that you're terrified of catching a ball on the 3-point line and just draining it consistently. There's nobody like that on this team. There's also not a ton of ball distribution, which is, again, just another issue you run into. But it's really tough, Bryan, when you're not scoring. It's making defense just almost easier for every team. I mean, every team is seeming to approach Idaho the exact same way now of, let the wings beat you. Let them take those shots. They're not going to torch you. So you pack it in deep. The posts can't get the ball. Nobody's penetrating well enough to force the defense to do anything more than just kind of softly collapse from a man into a zone, just gently enough to keep pressure on. And then you see it at the end of the game where you've been down 15 points the whole game and you can't do anything. Even you mentioned it, the Portland State last night, they cut it down to single digits in the first half. Again, Portland State opening up a nearly 20-point lead. Let me check the stats department on that real fast. They opened up a 20-point lead. Idaho got it back a little bit, and then as soon as Idaho hits a couple shots to make it an 8-point game, they switch to the full court press, and all of a sudden they go. That happened at 9:56. Quinn Denker hits a 3 to make it 23-15, and then all of a sudden it's 36-16 4 minutes later, just purely based on forcing turnovers. Jaden Barfus, again from the UI Argonaut in the comment section, ever since the Weber game, they haven't had an energy in the first half, and they dig themselves too big of a hole. You can't win when you have halves like that. Yeah, that's something I feel like we should have mentioned at the start here. You look at the first half of each of these games. Montana State 41-27, Montana 41-29, Portland State 45-27. So when you're getting into the 8, again projecting that as 2 equal halves, when you're on pace to give up 80-90 points every game and you're going to be lucky to get to 60, it's bad basketball, Bryan, and it just sucks. This is what I think we were afraid of happening. We knew Terry Golick and the decision to extend Zach Kloss after 1 year as the interim coach. We knew that was not going to be successful. It's what we've been talking about for years on this show. I think it's put this program in a pretty rough spot. Thank you, producer Martin, dropping the picture of Zach Kloss and the Western Colorado Who Gives a Shits behind us. This is just really tough, Bryan. Like, I hate I hate saying it the way that, again, I don't mean any shots here at any Vandals, but you can tell that this team just needs talent. This is different than the Zach Kloss, hey, we're turning the roster over every single year because he can't find anybody. This to me feels like, hey, it's Pribble got a pretty raw hand here. Put together a roster. Unfortunately, it's not great. Guys like Tyler Maris, who probably would have helped this team a little bit, get injured early. Linhart goes out and misses a lot of the year. Like there's obviously things that have happened that have contributed to this, but it really feels, Bryan, like this is headed for, you got to strip out this roster and keep some of the pieces that we think we can build around and move it forward from there with hey, it's the first year of a rebuild. This is going to take a lot of time. This is not a Jason X steps in and turns a talented team that was poorly coached into a playoff team. That was not going to be the case here. And unfortunately, we're seeing that as Idaho is just really crawling to the finish of the season.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to bring up to shift back to those last 3 games is longtime listeners might remember back in COVID days, which now seems like 7,000 years ago in a good way. We covered Idaho, Idaho's 1-win season. One of the things that got you and me real hot a couple times was Idaho having the famous turnovers to made field goals ratio, where, made field goals and turnovers were nearly identical. That came back 2 of the last 3 games, Dallas. Against Montana State, Idaho makes 17 shots, turns the ball over 17 times. Against Portland State, Idaho makes 19 shots, turns the ball over 18 times. You will beat what do you do if that's what your offense is doing? You get your ass kicked is what you do. There's no other way around it. And look, hey, you're right about, I want to stay a little more narrow to this year because, hey, you talking about the broad context, you're not wrong. Like again, we all on the show, our tone of, hey, the team got to 11 wins. The reason why we were, we acted excited about that. It wasn't acting. It was we were trying to be reasonable with what we were expecting the team to do. And last week, it felt like, hey, look, we know this team's not going to win the whole thing, but they've turned the corner. And this looks like a just new basketball team. These last 3 games look worse than the 8-game losing streak because 8-game losing streak, they're at least competing in the first half and then just running out of steam in the second half and getting steamrolled. That's not what's been happening here. It's the team they're getting stomped right out the gate. And go back to that Portland State game. You could just tell Portland State was playing. Hey, this is the thing, Jace Coburn, that coach for Portland State. I know I make fun of top 5 Portland State all the time. I'll never stop. But one of the things Jace Coburn does a good job of is getting his guys to play hard in your face. That's how they try to overcome some of the limitations of being Portland State. That program for a long time has been a kind of like last chance D1 of, hey, it's just going to be a ton of transfers. It's not at the level of New Mexico State when New Mexico State wasn't a factory for murderers and sexual offenders. But it's at that level of, hey, we know there's going to be a lot of turnover. We're going to make up for whatever gaps by playing very intense, trying to have a lot of athleticism, and we'll see how those pieces work together. They played like a team against Idaho that knew their production was going to be piecemeal, so everyone's got to kick ass as much as they can. Well, Idaho's the opposite, and that's who Idaho is right now. Idaho has no all Big Sky talent except maybe Juice Mims gets on like a third team. That's who Idaho is. They have no shot creators. Honestly, EJ Neal, who is a 3-and-D guy, is easily the best penetrator on Idaho, and he just is part of his skill set at this point in his life. Is he's not great change in direction with when he drives, so he's a pretty straight line driver. But anyway, EJ Neal's competing. He looked like a guy who belonged on Portland State with the energy he brought. But he stood out as honestly one of the lone Vandals who looked like he was ready to play. And a team with the talent deficit Idaho has, what they can do is play their ass off, play tough defense, and try to score enough. That's the recipe for this team to win. But if they're going to come out flat, there is no recipe to win. If this was last year, you and I would be livid about that level. And we're different because it's year one, sure. But we're closing in on to the end of the year one. Pribble's going to have to recruit some guys to the program. He's got to show some moral. Again, I think the moral victories matter in signifying Idaho as a place to go. I know there was a lot of hope we all had with ICCU, but hey, jury's in. 3 years in ICCU, the team has 11 wins is the crest so far. Hey, look at Portland State, guys. The jury's in. They have a new facility too. What mattered for them? Getting it. Coburn has looked like he's might be the right guy for Portland State. He's slowly building the program. That's what works. Doesn't matter. Honestly, I don't think it matters what facility you're playing in. Idaho State is an objectively better basketball program today than Idaho. Yes, Looney's been there for a while, but they're playing in Reed Gym is not ICCU, but Idaho. Hey, I know we talk about Idaho State as little brother. Idaho basketball has no little brothers right now. The way this team played the last 3 games, there's no such thing as an Idaho Vandal little brother for basketball. So what can we look for? Well, hey, I do want to point to Tyler Linhart and EJ Neal easily were the standout guys as having something promising to take away from Monday's Portland State game. EJ Neal's been like this for a while now. He looks like he's kind of figured out his D1 role, which it can take junior college guys a while to get there, Dallas. That's just the nature of transferring up a level. Juice Mims is an exception of a guy who looked like he found his footing right away. EJ Neal, he's been scoring around 11 a game over the last 5 or 6 games. He looks like he understands his role and he's embracing it. Tyler Linhart, 12 points off the bench. He's truly, as far as needing isolation baskets, which every team does at some point, Tyler Linhart is easily the best option Idaho has. As in hey, give it to a guy and let him post up and make a move. For sure, Linhart, 12 points, look solid for the most part. But if Idaho's gonna, before we transition to tournament talk, Pribble's gonna have to pull something out for this to matter, because Sacramento State, who Idaho will be playing on Saturday at 4:30 p.m. on ESPN Plus, because Big Sky Conference tournament format changed so that Wednesday of next week will be the championship game on ESPN. So there'll be no competition. So actually, for Big Sky basketball, if you can advance, you'll actually get some good national eyes on you, relatively speaking, for that championship game for Idaho. Games, the first round is Saturday. Idaho's got to turn around, because Sacramento State, you want to talk about turnarounds. You want to talk about teams closing out the season. Sacramento State, hey, Idaho swept the season series, but the last honestly, 5 or 6 games for Sacramento State, so since February 17th, Sacramento State has hung tight with Northern Colorado, the same team that kicked Idaho's ass twice, hung tight with Montana in Missoula, team that just kicked Idaho's ass, beat Montana State, beat Portland State, who just kicked Idaho's ass, and almost beat Eastern Washington final game of the season. So, hey, Sacramento State is playing their best basketball right now. And that's where Idaho's playing their worst. So Pribble's got a handful of days to turn it around pretty dang quick.
Yeah, Bryan, you talk about, again, the close loss to Eastern, the win over Portland State, the win over Montana State, kept it close with Montana. Like, this is lining up, like, honestly, the Colossian ends to the last handful of seasons where Idaho limps into the playoff and hopes that the bullet goes through the head quick, because it's just over. I hope that this is going to break, and this is not going to happen. But it feels pretty rough watching it, Bryan. This last stretch of basketball it's just been bad. Andrew Whipple says in the comments, nothing to stress. Vandal Hoops will be okay. Nice arena and a fired up new coach will bring in better players. Idaho isn't Utah State where a new coach can bring in a bunch of studs right away. I really hope that's the case. Again, there's some guys on this team that I think could have a legitimately good D1 future. I think Tyler Linhart could be a solid contributor on most Big Sky schools. I think he'd be a really good third option on a talented squad. Again, like you mentioned, EJ Neal looks really good. Julius Mims has had again a pretty solid year.
Yeah, Mims could start on virtually every Big Sky team.
Yeah, so like there's pieces here, but just the overall thing is there's just not enough depth on this roster, and it just runs into that problem.
So, hey, let me respond with Andrew too. Like, hey, I guess I hope listeners aren't missing this. This isn't like a shit on Alex Pribble thing, but he's got some stuff he has to solve. Like we have faith in Alex Pribble. We talked last week about the team looking very different for about 8 games. But hey, keep in mind the Big Sky. I know the Big Sky is not the most prestigious basketball conference. That's not a secret, but what the reputation the Big Sky has with basketball coaches is that it is a coach's league. And when I say that, what I mean is you can come to the Big Sky and there's no Gonzaga program who for sure is going to win the conference. If your team is well coached and you build your program, virtually anyone can be competing for that championship spot. Hell, look at Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado was terrible last year. They're finishing in top 3 of the conference in a 1 year turnaround. If Northern Colorado can do that in 1 year, eventually Idaho can. But for Idaho, look, we know Idaho's playing for the moral victory. They need that. I think they need that first round win. But the other thing is, like, we're going to speculate on stuff later about what's going to happen roster wise. But there's only one senior on this roster, D'Angelo Minnis. There is no prayer. Only one guy is turning over. I honestly expect about half the roster is going to have to turn over because, hey, this is Pribble's career. He had 1 year to get his feet wet. The clock universally is going to start ticking next year. So as far as showing progress, as far as looking at getting that extension, so you don't run into that back end year not knowing what's going to happen. For personally, I'm talking about Alex Pribble. There's no way he's gambling his career on the roster they have today coming into the future. So the guys on the team, what are they playing for? Well, they're playing for their potential role in Idaho basketball into the future. So there's still a lot at stake to me for Idaho heading into the Big Sky Conference tournament. And the reason I brought up coaches is we have faith in Pribble, but keep in mind, there's a lot of pretty solid Big Sky coaches, which is to say they get to watch the same tape. They get to react. It's Pribble's time now to react to what he's seen teams do to Idaho the last 3 games and to try and to figure out how does he light a fire under these guys so they can start out. Again, like if they were starting out games right now, like they were during the 8-game losing streak, we'd have a different tone. These games would be much more competitive. The issue is Idaho looking like they lay down right away. And that's something you gotta know that has to be front and center on Pribble's mind. Your X's and O's are irrelevant if your team's going to lie down like Idaho has the last 3. That's the thing that he's got to fix. He's got to get these guys ready to compete because Sacramento State, again, they're playing their best basketball. Sacramento State, the head coach David Patrick doesn't have a good record at Sac State, but he has a pretty good resume overall. Was a good head coach when he was at UC Riverside. So Sacramento State, even though Idaho's got 2 wins against them, I think this is the matchup Idaho needed. I don't think Idaho's beaten anyone has a prayer against anyone in the Big Sky right now who's not Sac State or NAU. But I mean, you got to know that David Patrick's defense first team is looking at the clips of these last few games, and they're thinking, yeah, we can pick up a win here.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan, you hit it on the head. You can't start the way that they've started. The Montana game was at least a little bit closer to start, but Montana State, it was a 9-point game at the first media timeout. Portland State, it was a 10-point game at the first media timeout. And obviously, basketball is a game of runs. In a perfect world, you'd see Idaho jump out to a 10-point lead at some point, but I think we're probably a couple of years away from that. But what are you supposed to do when you are already down double digits 4 minutes into the game? That's just, you're shooting yourself in the foot is the best way to put it. I want to hit a couple things in the comment section real quick. Andrew Whipple saying fans got to show up. Attendance has been pathetic. Coach needs to hit up all the fraternities and dorms, buy pizzas for fans, something. Martin in the comment section saying, I'm not the person to answer because I go to every game, but unless there's a giveaway or something fun at halftime, not a lot of people are going to show up. Even when the team was good in Cowan, not a lot of people showed up. That is, unfortunately, I think the reality of Idaho basketball. It's just not something that you're going to pack the stands for, but we've had 5 years of trash.
Yeah, let me put, so hey, a slightly different version of saying the same thing, Dallas, which you and I are quite familiar with doing. Since I'm going to read Idaho's last 6 seasons of records: 2018-19, 5-27, 2019-20, 2020, 8-24, COVID year, 2020-2021, 1-21, 2021-2022, 9-22, last year, 10-22, this year, 11-9. So like Andrew, like I don't disagree. I think Idaho needs to get more people in ICCU, and with how the arena is set up, they don't need 4,000 people. They need 2,000 people for that to be one of the best environments in the Big Sky. But that's around 40 wins in 6 years, man. I mean, just no one packs an arena for a team that's it's bad basketball.
7.5 wins a year is a tough thing to
Yeah,
get past.
like, hey, we believe in Alex Pribble again. Like, I'm with you there, Andrew, but Idaho's taught fans for the last 7 years that you don't really have to pay attention to men's basketball. How do you teach people to pay attention? You do what football did. You win games. That's just going to be a longer process. Like Jane Barfa says, in the comment section, you can't expect them to come when you don't win. And that's the issue. So, I mean, honestly, like I think Andrew and I bet if Andrew and I turn this into a 20-minute discussion, we're on the same page. Well, look, we want more people getting in there. We want more energy, but like, hey, the team's got to turn around. I mean, just remember football. Jason Eck had to prove for a while that Idaho was turning the program around to get things going. And it really wasn't until this last year that we had some of the kick-ass games. But that was after a complete year of evidence that you should pay a complete year and a half of evidence that you should be paying attention to football games. That's a lot of good basketball for Idaho to put together, and we just haven't seen it for 7 years.
I want to hit some more comments in the comment section real quick. CapDan58 really wanted to finish on a high note, got to fire it up, and hopefully win one in Boise to get this bad taste out of our mouth. Losing to Sack and that Skullet dude after a late skid will be souring a lot of the optimism I started brewing this season. And then lastly, sucks that we're squandering one of the best venues in the league on perpetual rebuilding. Not Pribble's fault that he's here 2 or 3 years too late. That really is the truth. I want to hit a couple things in that. Captain, totally agree, man. It sucks that Pribble's here 2 or 3 years too late. Had he been hired, instead of Zach Kloss when after that interim season Kloss got, or had, I don't know, a full search with the search committee happened, and maybe it's not Pribble at that time, but 3 years ago, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it is Ryan Looney, maybe it's Matt Logie, maybe it's one of the newer coaches to the Big Sky, whatever it may be. Feels like that was the time to strike with a new coach and rebuild Vandal basketball rather than continue to let Don Verlin's assistant run the program into the ground, as Don Verlin had unfortunately started to do at the end there. But what I want to circle back to is finishing this on a high note, Brian. There's still a chance. We've still got a game in Boise, and we have 80 people listening to us live, which is a lot for Vandal basketball. So I got to plug it. Patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. It's less than a cup of coffee to join. We do have game threads, guys. We have a men's basketball channel. If you're looking to talk basketball with people, obviously it wasn't quite as active over the last couple games because things got really ugly. But I do expect, hey, it's a Saturday afternoon game, 4:30 Pacific, 5:30 Mountain. Feel like, hey, this is going to be a time people are going to be checking in. Idaho's playing in Boise. If you want to come hang out with some Vandals and talk some basketball, it's a great place to do that.
Bryan might have whiskey recommendations too for the games.
It's also very true.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Patreon.com/Tubs the Club. I just want to push back Dallas slightly. If you're looking to talk Vandal basketball, like the experience is in, Discord's the best. If you're looking for volume as your metric, it's not even close. Like, even a slow Discord basketball game is better than anywhere else you can go. So hey, before we talk playoffs, we do have some bright side to hit on.
We do. Because if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976, and they are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. You can check out special trips like one to see the Perced Meteor Shower. Camp on pristine beaches, or bitches, as Brian likes to say. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in the beautiful natural hot springs. And again, guys, like I'm always saying, fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire USA. Just bring your clothes. Let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now, 406-540-4450. Again, 406-540-4450. Or you can check them out at hughesriver.com. If you're watching live, producer Martin's got Colin Hughes right up there on the screen. We love you, Colin. Thank you so much for your support. Brian, we're halfway through this show. I want to shout out to Nick McIver in the comment section. These last few games have felt almost worse than the 8-game streak. Those games, the team was at least in it for the first half plus. Now it seems flat from the jump. Obviously, Brian, we just talked about that for a couple minutes. What does Idaho need to do to not come out and fall right on their face? this year.
Well,
against
first
Sac
thing is to acknowledge the stakes, which is Idaho has not won a Big Sky Conference tournament game in 6 years. It's a huge deal. Second, for our viewers, you see in the background that Easter egg. Idaho's 2-0 against Sac State. We get a win. That's a clean 3-game sweep worthy of any duster you have at your house or the one hanging over my left shoulder. So with that as the backdrop. So hey, good news, bad news about Idaho in the tournament. The bad news is if you're playing like Idaho is, any team is going to feel like a national championship contender. The good news is Sacramento State is a uniquely good matchup for Idaho because Sacramento State, like Idaho, they don't score very well. In Big Sky play, Sacramento State was the only team who scored worse than Idaho at 62.8 points per game. That's on the season. That's on the conference season itself. Now, of course, a downside, Sac just put up 88 against Eastern Washington. So Idaho's putting up 88 against no one. So keep that in mind. Sacramento State is for sure playing their best basketball they have of the whole season. But the DNA of this team is they try to play tough defense, but they don't score that much. They play tough defense partially because they don't score that much. In the two matchups earlier in the season against Idaho, Sacramento State lost on December 28th, 61-58 in Moscow on the Danker buzzer beater. But hey, that template, very low scoring. 61 points beats virtually no one in college basketball, or it should beat virtually no one in college basketball. Well, next time Idaho played Sacramento State, Idaho wins 61-45. So in a 16 points, we score 45. So that's an ass kicking. So the good news is Sacramento State has not been effective at scoring against Idaho at all, just like they have been effective against scoring anyone the entire season. Might be good news, might be bad news, but the skullet that Captain 58 was referring to, Duncan Powell, has not played in the last 2 games for Sacramento State. And if you go back 3 games, he only played 7 minutes. There's no news about if the dude's injured or left the team because it's Sacramento State basketball. There's virtually no reporting. But Duncan Powell was effective in the 2 games against Idaho, and he appears to be either injured or out of the rotation completely. He hasn't been a starter for over a month. So for Sacramento State, that's not the only thing that's working better. That seems to have helped. But for Idaho, if you look at who Idaho struggled with matchup wise, Powell was a guy who Idaho had some difficulty with, and it's unclear if he's even going to be playing. So phase 1, that's good. I expect this game to be low scoring. As all Idaho games recently have been. But you said, hey, what's Idaho got to do? Phase 1, they got to compete. Sacramento State's competing absolutely to close out the season. If Idaho shows up like they did the last few times, they're going to get their ass kicked. That's it, the end. But Idaho is, look, they got to get points inside. They just have to. They need to give. I know that teams they've changed defensively to prevent Mims and Rose from getting some of those looks inside. But Idaho's also not the guards for Idaho have been pretty bad at getting Mims looks when he is open that are other than catch and shoot 3 looks. Every team in the Big Sky wants Julius Mims to turn into a catch and shoot 3-point shooter because he's not getting put back dunks if he's doing that. He's not getting close shots that no one in the Big Sky has a chance of blocking when he's doing that. So Idaho, I think, needs to get dedicated inside touches. I hope they start Tyler Linhart, because offensively as a post, I know he was injured. He easily is the post coming to play the hardest, and he's been the most effective. He was more effective against Portland State than anyone else was for Idaho. So I think Idaho needs to get some inside points because they got to get some of those easy points so that the Vandal guards only have to account for around 40-ish points. That's not too tall a task for the Vandal guards, but if the Vandal guards are supposed to score 70 points, they're beating no one. So Sacramento State does slow it down a little bit. The good news is that means they're not going to want to press Idaho because pressing increases tempo. That plays to an Idaho strength. But in short, show up with some intensity, get some inside points that can buy enough margin for just a guard or 2 to show up, because this is also, hey, jury's in very often in conference tournaments. You're playing on a neutral floor. The arena in Boise is a hockey venue, not a basketball venue. Depth perception is going to be different than it was during the regular season. Idaho was the number 7 3-point shooting team in the Big Sky during the regular season. Sacramento State was the number 5. They're both at 34%, and then change. Neither of those teams wins games by hitting threes, but you can expect that if you're an okay 3-shooting team, you're probably going to subtract a few points from that heading into conference tournament. So we need to be ready for a low-scoring, rough and tumble game if Idaho's going to come out on top. Dallas, thank God you're the one muted.
Damn it. It's been a while since I've done that. Interestingly enough, Bryan, Sac State has actually had to pick up the pace a little bit here at the end. Obviously, it was just the teams that they're playing. I mean, it's tough to play Eastern Washington and play them slowly. It's really just not going to happen very frequently. But I do agree with that. Interestingly enough, the overall pace rating from Sac State has actually gone up over the last handful of games, the wins against Montana State, Portland State, and then the close loss to Eastern. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But as Captain 58 says, the black hole of Hornet sports media, Stingers down. It's just so hard to figure out what is actually going to go on there. Who knows what's going on with Duncan Powell? I don't know if his parents even know what's going on with him. It's just how hard it is to get anything out of Sacramento State. There's just not a lot of love for that school in that city, at least when it comes to the media coverage. Patty Frakes in the comment section, they were insane from 3 last night, that being Portland State, not Portland State, Idaho, that being Eastern Washington, Sacramento State, because Vandal student Patrick still thinks for some reason that he's an Eag fan first over Vandals. We'll get him fixed on that. 18 3-pointers from Sacramento State last night, Bryan. I don't think there is much Idaho can do about that. That's just, if they get hot, they get hot, and it's just there's nothing Idaho can do. There's nothing offensively about this team that screams, yeah, we can get in a firefight. Just, it's not going to happen. It has to be a slower game. It has to be a low-scoring game.
Well,
otherwise, Idaho just can't do it.
I just want to push back a little bit. Idaho doesn't need it to be slower paced necessarily, because like Idaho doesn't play. Idaho's not Idaho State. They do not play a deliberately slow offensive style. Sometimes they are slow, but it's not movement without purpose beyond the milking of the shot clock. That's just Idaho has not been able to. Idaho's wings can't put pressure on defense. That can slow down your offense. That's the issue to me with Idaho pace wise. But Idaho does need and Idaho, if Idaho can score 70 on a solid-ish night, like they can have a game up to that level. That's fine. I'm saying I like the matchup is favorable because Sacramento State minus those last 3 games. And you're right. Like their pace numbers jumped a ton the last 3 games. It will be interesting to see, will that sustain? Because in 2 of those 3 matchups, you had Eastern and you also had Portland State. Well, Portland State presses and that manufactures a faster pace as well. But if you look, like it's a pretty clear jump of they moved to 70-ish possessions starting at Montana State. That persisted through that final 3. Montana State doesn't necessarily force a fast pace. So that's a good point for you to bring up is that may be the formula that Patrick now thinks he needs to go with. And that might be why Duncan Powell's not playing as much, because Duncan Powell's more of a post player, not a ball handler, certainly not a shooter. If you compare that, if you want to compare that, the final 3 games pace, like you just brought up, to what Idaho pace is, well, Idaho often is in the mid-ish 60s, which is a higher pace than Sacramento State was for most of the season, where Sacramento State was down to like 57, 58. That's a purposely slow pace. Idaho is just more of a moderate pace, but not trying to obsess over that. The reason it matters is these are 2 teams that for the season were the worst scoring teams in the Big Sky. Both coaches, you have to know, are thinking, hey, like we got to do something. It's very hard to win scoring 60 points a game. You have to be an elite defensive team. And it's incredibly tough to always hold teams to that low of score. So maybe, hey, we talked about coaches make changes. That could be the adjustment Patrick's made. Now we have to see what's the adjustment Pribble makes.
Jaden Parfus in the comment section. We need to get Juice and Kyson going again. D'Lo will be fully healthy. If EJ, Tyler Linhart, and the bench can get going, I think we can make a run. Got to stop leaving shooters open as well. Bryan, that kind of alludes to, you mentioned hoping to see Linhart start. I am intrigued to see what's going to happen. Obviously, D'Lo is just barely coming back. Linhart just barely coming back. Do you trust in those guys to figure things out? Do you run one of them off the bench? And there's enough things Pribble can do here with the roster to at least toy with things to see if something different will happen. But Bryan, I got to be honest, man, the more we talk about this, the less faith I have that Idaho is going to break that Big Sky tourney losing streak.
Well, hey, I want to talk about what Jaden said. Again, like you said, hey, get Juice and Kyson going again. D-Lo will be fully healthy. Look here, we brought up, like, now part of the issue is Idaho's got to get better at getting Juice and Kyson touches. But Juice and Rose had virtually no good touches against Portland State, because the guards are putting no pressure on the Portland State defense, which lets the Portland State defenders be as aggressive. Like, hey, sometimes they trap off off pick and rolls, not being worried at all about Idaho guards making them pay, or it's an automatic switch, and just make sure that Rose and Mims are not able to get behind a defender, which stops them from getting good position. There's other actions you can do to try to get guys post touches, but part of why those guys haven't been getting going is because it's at the point of attack, which means wings. Idaho's is not putting pressure on teams defensively. They're not making guys make mistakes, which that does lead to a secondary issue. Idaho doesn't have a ton of ball handlers. And again, hey, not trying to call out anyone individually, of course, but like, Quinn Danker is the team's leading scorer. He has just been atrocious defensively the last few games. He is getting picked on virtually anytime he closes out. Auden Moody for Montana, who is not a guy who puts the ball on the floor, blew by Quinn Danker multiple times in route to that Montana blowout. You pay attention to Portland State. Lots of times when you see a guy on the wing matched up against Danker, the guy's going to do one hard move and go, because Danker has been stopping no one, which is frustrating. But hey, there's our other issue with main ball handler. Giangelo Mendes plays hard. He's a very tough dude. He's teeny. And when Idaho has to switch, or if he gets a mismatch, that's another guy who teams immediately attack. And there's not a lot Mendes can do. If he's given up 6 inches, which he is to a lot of Big Sky guards, he can play tough defense. The guys are going to shoot over him. So, like, hey, to me, that's part of the bind Pribble has, is he's got 2 defensive liabilities as his best ball handlers. But those are both 2 of the guys who at times, they don't do it consistently, but they can put pressure on defense. They can make shots. They can help create shots. But Danker and Mendes, they can't be negative offensively where they're, scoring. Well, I mean, Danker and Mendes didn't score that well against Portland State, but they can't be scoring 8 or 10 and giving up 15, 18 points a game. Like, it just doesn't work. Idaho can't work that way. But that's a question Pribble has to try to figure out how to make it work against Sacramento State. Mercifully, the matchup has looked okay with Sacramento State through early season. But last month, Sacramento State looks like I'm just going to say it. Sacramento State looks like a better basketball team right now than Idaho, because everyone looks like a better basketball team than what we saw the last 3 games out of Idaho.
Bryan, again, not to like pile on Quinn Danker and the guards here, but that is the problem. You go back to the Portland State game, Danker goes 2 for 8, 5 points. He did have 5 assists, which was nice to see. But even EJ Neal, who we talked highly about, of like, hey, he's a guy we definitely want to see next year. Feel like he's really setting in his role. He led the team with 4 turnovers. Like, just not great there. You go back to the Montana game, you lose 23 by 23. Well, Danker goes 4 for 13. Sure, he had 13 points, but he went 4 for 13. And when, like you said, he is typically getting crushed on the defensive end. He led the team with 4 turnovers in that game.
His main defensive matchup scored 22.
Yeah, it's just the math there just doesn't line up for winning basketball. And it again, I'm not trying to call one guy out as the problem, because this is not a one guy problem here. This is a team-wide issue of there's just not enough production in certain ways to help out. Again, I'd love to see Rose and Mims put up 35 in this tournament game, but is that going to happen unless if Danker shoots 58%, then yeah, okay, this is probably a game that Idaho's going to win. But if you're not performing particularly efficiently and you're just a sieve on the defensive end, like I'm not trying to call the kid out, because God knows I would look so much worse if I tried to step on a basketball court with any of these guys. But it's just tough. There's not a lot of things you can do about it when, yeah, I'd love to get the post play going, but when the guards are struggling to score efficiently, struggling to cause any sort of true penetration, you're just jacking up shots and missing them. There's just not a lot you can do about that until you either find a new sport or bring some new players in. That's really about your options there.
No, well, what you can do is and hey, we talked about we talked about where Denker struggled. I think we've been clear there. When Denker plays well, he has been better at facilitating a bit. It's important for him to not force things offensively because he's not a great shot creator, but he can be a solid shot maker if he lets the offense come to him. That's where he's more likely going to have his more efficient nights. But if Idaho's going to win, they're going to need to get points out of Denker, because I got to tell you, like, EJ Neal he's been coming on, but like him coming on is scoring like 10, 11, 12 points. It's kind of like Linhart. Hey, Linhart's been coming on, but what this season when Linhart is solid, he's scoring around 12 points. Denker is really the only offensive weapon who, like, if things are going well, can score over 20. Idaho needs a big outing out of him. We've seen some. We talked last week about Denker having back-to-back some of his better games of the season. So, like, again, don't mean to pile on the guy, but the bind Idaho's in, again, it circles back to competing. So I think Purple's got a real question of, do you go with what you've been going with, or do you need to shake the lineup up to try to go heavy into defense first and go with the guys who are going to give your effort? Or look, Purple's been game to juggle the starting lineup. I really do hope we see Linhart at the 4, and that we have more dedicated post touch to Linhart, because he is a willing and able passer out of the post. And that's how Idaho can get essentially some reliable inside-outside play, because Idaho doesn't have penetrators to reliably get penetration, and which will then sink defenses to create open threes. That's just that hasn't been there for Idaho. And honestly, the formula for the most part for teams has been do not double on penetration. Do not help that much on penetration, because the only guy who turns a corner for Idaho off the dribble is EJ Neal for in-stride layups, but he's a pretty hot, cold finisher. And at this point, he's just not he's had a game where he scored around 20, but if EJ Neal scores 20 points in the tournament game, you'd say, oh yeah, dude, best D1 game of his career. We're stoked about it, which is to say other teams, they know they have to account for the guy, but they're probably not sitting there concerned, hey, EJ Neal might go off for 30 or something like that. Idaho's they have to find a way to get some more open looks. I think Linhart as kind of a focal point for some of those touches is the way for Idaho to go. But none of that matters. None of the X's and O's matter whatsoever. None of the matchups even matter if this team isn't going to show up with the heart we saw in the previous state games.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We can talk all about individual players and performances and things that we could love to see change in the lineup, things that we'd like to see individual players do slightly differently or perform better. But at the end of the day, Brian, if you go down 10 points to Sacramento State in the first 5 minutes, is there really a chance that this team finds the heart and drive and fire to turn that around? Because we haven't seen that in the last couple of games. That's the problem here for me, is we're talking about all of this, but when you look at it, okay, yeah, you got a week off, give or take a couple days there, but you're coming in playing the worst basketball you're playing of the season against, yeah, sure, they're the number 10 team, but they're not the number 10 team that Idaho has been the last few years, coming in, limping through, coaching staff wearing gray and blue because support the guy who got fired because, shouldn't have fired him. Sac State is coming in here playing the best basketball they have played all season under a coach that has maybe not been super successful as a head coach, but has had a very long and storied career as a successful basketball coach. I don't feel great about it, Brian. I just don't. Looking at it, I hope I'm wrong. This doesn't feel like the winning formula this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we were to pick right now, I'd say you should probably pick Idaho to lose. But if Idaho's going to win a Big Sky tournament game, this is the team they had to play. Sacramento State was the single best matchup for Idaho, the single best chance to turn stuff around. So, hey, we're closing in on finishing up. I want to shift off that. You and I are both essentially saying, hey, like if I had to put money on it, I'd put money on Sac State based off what we've seen. Sac State rising while Idaho's falling. But this is all sports are games of matchups. This is the matchup Idaho needed.
Exactly.
We have purposely not extrapolated into the tournament because you and I are on the same page. If Idaho wins, they're not beating Eastern. In round 2 of the tournament. So the championship for Idaho is Saturday, 4:30 p.m. Watch it. If you're in Boise, go to the game. But for the next couple minutes, Dallas, just handicap real quick. What teams after the first round are you paying attention to get that NCAA tournament berth?
I'm going to slightly filibuster you on this, just ever so slightly, Bryan, because I do think this is the Vandal Basketball Championship for 2023-2024. If Pribble and the boys go out and win this game, all of a sudden I feel a whole lot better about this season and how it just ended. If they win a tournament game, I don't care that it's 9 versus 10 and that, Sac State has been a terrible team for most of the season. Don't care. That is an incredible amount of progress from what we've seen the last 5 years. So they win that game. I'm probably having a completely different conversation with you next week about, hey, they got boat raced by Eastern, but that was expected. Okay, whatever. They went down there. They won a game. It was a really rough year. Obviously, injuries took a toll maybe on this team more than they have the last couple of years, but it was a good thing. However, talking about the teams again, Eastern is just unreal. David Riley doesn't feel like he's going to be there very long. They just continue ever since Jim Hayford came in and rebuilt that program. Just feels like, man, whatever assistant they put up at the top of the bench just ends up finding a new gear for them to unlock. They become some sort of incredible basketball machine out there in the USSR base that they call Reese Court. Honestly, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for Eastern to hopefully run through it. I have a weird feeling it's going to be Northern Colorado, the 2 seed. I don't believe in Montana at the 3. And Weber State at number 4 is kind of interesting because you have Dylan Jones, who's going to be an NBA guy. So you don't see a whole lot of NBA guys come through the Big Sky. So that's what I'm looking for is, hey, Dylan Jones is probably going to be fun if he's going to try to do small school guy makes a run into the lottery of the NBA. This is the type of guy that does that. The senior from a small conference that just somehow runs through a couple squads, gets into the tournament, and maybe makes a little noise. Probably not. Big Sky is probably going to be a pretty low seed. Don't expect an upset there, but this is the kind of time that you see those guys take control. So I'm thinking Eastern's probably, again, I'm going chalk here. Eastern's probably going to win the whole thing, but I really hope to see on March 12th Eastern Weber State. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Sorry, Ron Lowney in the comment section, our notoriously known Bobcat fan. I am rooting against the Bobcats in Game 5 on Monday. So sorry about that, Ron.
So I believe I'm going to push back on you a little bit with Montana. One, Portland State has 2 road wins the entire year. So I believe in Montana's ability to get to the semifinals for sure. They start the first round bye. The matchup with Northern Colorado, should Northern Colorado get there, which isn't guaranteed. If Idaho State beats NAU, Northern Colorado and Idaho State, I believe, split their season series. But if Northern Colorado gets to a semifinal in the bottom half of the bracket with Montana, both those games against Northern Colorado, Montana were close. Montana, relatively under Travis Secure, relatively famous of kind of no showing for some of the shittier teams and looking not so great, but they do show up for the good teams. They've also won 5 of their last 6. So the Grizz hitting their stride at the time you really want to. 21 wins on the season. Not bad. I mean, not bad at all. When Idaho hasn't won 20 games since 2016, 2017. On the top half of the bracket, Eastern should cruise into the semifinals. I know they just narrowly beat Sacramento State, but no, I'm not worried about Eastern having a repeat from last year. I think the guys who stayed will have learned the lesson from last year's upset, where also Eastern was kind of crashing and burning as the season ended last season. That's not the case. They played a few close games, but they came out on top to close the season. Now that top half of the bracket, like Montana State just beat Weber to close the year. Weber's intriguing because they're one of the more talented teams in the league. They have the single best win of any Big Sky team this year, beating St. Mary's in St. Mary's. But that team, for one reason or another throughout the year, after that early out of conference run, they haven't clicked. So even though they have the best or second best player in the conference, Dylan Jones and St. Thomas from Northern Colorado are the only two in the running for player of the year. So out of those two guys, Weber has one of them. Dylan Jones is kind of the most complete player in the conference, but it's about having some talent. Steve Verplanken averages over 12 points a game, transfer from Fresno State. The Wildcats just haven't clicked. They've had some effort issues throughout the year that head coach Eric Duft earlier in the season brought up. I mean, he said this to the media so that his players would hear it too. That doesn't matter what happens for Weber throughout the second half of the season, but they're not going to lose because the guys playing aren't the guys playing the hardest. So if a coach has to say that in public, there's chemistry issues, something there that's not quite right. But I'd kind of pick Weber to win. I don't think they're going to lose back-to-back to Montana State. But I think you're right. Best bet is Northern Colorado, Eastern, the championship. The best look on TV is Eastern Montana in the championship, because those two in basketball absolutely are rivals. I don't care what any idiot on Twitter says. They're rivals in basketball for sure. But I think, that now follow-up question, who gives the Big Sky the best chance to win a tournament game? Oh, for a fact, Eastern. They've got the size and the athleticism to give the Big Sky a prayer. Big Sky hasn't won a tournament game for a long time, since Damian Lillard was at Weber State, and it wasn't Weber State that won the game, as Montana. So I think you should, after Idaho loses, might pain some guys to say this, might make Patty excited. If you're a Vandal fan, once Idaho's out of the tournament, you should transition into an Eastern fan.
Well, there you have it, guys. The 1 hour of Vandal basketball in, again, 4:30 Pacific on Saturday the 9th, 5:30 Mountain Time. Idaho versus Sac State. You can come hang out with us. Patreon.com/Tubs of the Club. Any final thoughts, Brian?
No, man. The tone of this episode wasn't as excited, but we'll have a basketball recap to get to once this is done. And next week we're going to record after the day after the championship's over, because listen to the episode, you know why. But we have basketball season to recap, and then honestly, man, spring football is the last big thing before that long, to me, the sports desert of mid-April into August. So still have a few concrete things to look forward to, in spite of how we feel. I've been watching the basketball games. I still believe in Alex Pribble. I believe he's going to be able to answer some of the questions we talked about. And I don't just believe because he's a Vandal. I believe we've seen evidence from other games. That's why I believe we've seen some good stuff out of this team throughout the year. So, tune in, support the team, and buckle up for an off season.
Yeah, that's couldn't have said it better myself, Brian. As Martin says in the YouTube comments, fuck it, go Vandals, V's up, motherfuckers.
Gosh darn you.
Fully agree, Martin. V's up, baby. Go Vandals. Martin, any final thoughts? You've been on the bench.
Yeah. I kind of agree with what you guys said. I'm still going to be, if I was ever picking these games, I'm going to stay in gimmick and do with what I know best and go Idaho. But I kind of like Dylan Jones, watching Dylan Jones play against Idaho, and I kind of hope he gets to the big show and the dance and shows off for Weber State. I know for women's there hasn't been a lot of talk this year, but I know Patrick and I are going to be doing something after this once this tournament's over, kind of recapping the whole season. And yeah, that's pretty much all I really have.
That's Vandal student Patrick, everybody. Reminder, V's up, and go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go. I got to make sure I have the lineup right. Oh, come on. Here we go.
That's an unbelievable fuck up. 2 minutes of muted talk. We're gonna start. Oh man, we're just gonna start that over. Good Lord. This is producer Bryan doing a terrible job of even finding what we're gonna play us out with. So we're just gonna call it good. See you guys Tuesday.